Hi guys, my name's Vanessa Smedley and I'm a painter. Today we're going to paint this nice little scene of a lake in Oklahoma, and this is on Goose Island in the middle of Lake Ulaga, or Ulaga Lake. Never can quite remember which way that is, but anyways. My husband took me this photo when he was out on one of his many outdoor adventures, so we're just going to give this a shot. And I'm going to show you 4 different texture techniques that you need to know as a watercolorist to make your life easier. So, let's do this! Here's the materials list for today. You can pause and screenshot, or they're listed in the description for you. There was apparently a lot of nice cloud cover this day when my husband was out there, so I'm taking some nice cerulean blue and I am painting around some cloud forms, and then I'm coming back in with a nice wet brush, a smaller one, and I am softening the edges of that. And now I'm using a scrunched up shop towel to take a little bit more of that out in kind of a cloud pattern here. Now I've mixed some cerulean blue into some Payne's gray, and I'm painting in this landmass here in the background. And I'm using a nice flat brush so that I can keep the surface of the water nice and straight. Now I've mixed some cadmium orange into my cerulean blue here, and I'm going to use that for this nice muddy water that we have here in Oklahoma. So I've let the landmass dry, and now I'm coming back in with my flat brush and I'm wetting the whole thing, and then I'm going to drop in this kind of grayish muddy color here. And then I'm adding in kind of a ripple effect with some more cerulean here. Now I'm going to mix up a color for my rocks, so I have burnt umber and I'm mixing in cerulean blue for that. And now I'm going to show you my first texture technique here. So I'm going to wet the entire area that is going to be rocks, and I'm going to use some plastic wrap over the top of this. That is right, plastic wrap. So I'm painting in that brown that I mixed all over the area that's going to be rock, and then I'm going to drop in some other colors as well. So we're going to bring in some yellow ochre, some Payne's gray, some burnt umber, just dropping those in all these different areas, and then I'm going to come back in with some plastic wrap. So I've scrunched it all up, and then I'm placing it on top of all of that wet paint, and then you put a heavy book on top of it and let it dry for at least 30 minutes. That's what I do. After it has plenty of time to dry, you come back, take the book off, and then you peel it slowly away, and you have a nice rock texture base that you can start from. It makes achieving that rock texture so much easier in the long run. And now I'm going to mix up 3 different greens. 2 of them I'm going to start with cadmium yellow, and then I'm going to add in some cobalt blue and then some sap green. And then the second one, I am adding in more cobalt blue and sap green to make it darker and more of a bluish green. And then for the third green, I'm going to start out with hooker's green because I want it to be a little more blue. Then I add in some burnt umber to tone that back, and then some Payne's gray to make it nice and dark. Then I'm going to use the yellowest of these greens, and I'm going to do the highlights of this big grass patch right here. So the areas that are the lightest, I'm going to start by using that nice yellow green. Then I'm going to come back in with my medium green here, and then eventually I'm going to bring in some more of the dark green. Now that's looking pretty good, but I think it needs some areas where you have lighter kind of highlights on the grass. So I'm going to bring in a palette knife and I'm going to show you how to score the paper. So what I'm doing is I'm taking a nice palette knife and I'm basically scraping down to the paper into the wet paint, and that is giving me highlights on the side of each blade of grass, and it's giving me more texture in this grass area here. It's an easy way to bring back in highlights when you don't want to have to plan for masking fluid up front. It brings the highlight right back in the middle of all that dark. It is a tricky balance to get it scraped at the right time, because if you do it too early, the paint will just soak in and then it'll make darker marks. You have to wait until it dries just a little bit, but not too dry, and then you scrape it and it will bring the highlight back. Now it's time to add some more definition into the rocks here. So we've got like a nice base texture here for these rocks, but we need some more detail. So I've added in some Payne's gray to my brown mix, and I am just going along here and adding in the darkest areas of shadow. And then I'm using a damp brush to soften the edges of that. You may be thinking, Oologah, as in Oologah Lake. That's an interesting word, and you'd be right, it is very interesting. But it's actually a Cherokee word that means either dark clouds or cloudy weather, depending on the source that you go to. There are actually a lot of places in Oklahoma that are named either Cherokee or Choctaw words, and that is because Oklahoma, or at least the eastern part of Oklahoma, was originally a vast part of Indian Territory. And the capital of the Cherokee Nation is actually in Tahlequah, Oklahoma. There are also a lot of French words for places in Oklahoma because back in the day there were a lot of French fur traders around as well. As we let all of that dry, it is time for our next texture, and this is dry brushing. So for all of these leaves at the top here, I am going to dry brush in a base of leaves for that. So I've got a nice kind of dry mixture on my brush, like it's not super wet, doesn't have a lot of water, turning my brush on its side, and then I'm scraping it along the valleys and the mountains of the paper, and that's called dry brushing. It is, I'd say, one of the most important textures that you can learn as a watercolorist because it is so versatile and you use it in so many different ways. You can use it for a rock texture, foliage texture, on tree bark, all kinds of things. I've started with the most yellow of the greens again, and then going progressively darker with the greens as well. And then around the edges, I'm also kind of using like very small brush strokes to mimic leaves. I'm not putting in every leaf because that would be way overkill, but I'm giving the suggestion of leaves by adding in these small kind of dotty brush strokes. While that is still wet, I have mixed up a lot of burnt umber with a ton of Payne's gray, and now I'm going to fill in the trunk. It's very, very dark because it's in a lot of shadow, so it's just a whole lot of Payne's gray. So I'm going to just run it up along here, and I'm going to skip some areas where the foliage is because you want to hide it behind some foliage. And since it's still wet, it's going to blend in a lot better than it would if I was just painting it in when it was dry. I used a number 8 round brush for most of those branches, but now I'm switching over to a number 6 round brush so that I can get these tiny little spriggy branches in there. I'm sure that's the technical term, but anyways, the tiny little ones that you need to get smaller at the end, you need something at least as small as a number 6, maybe even as a number 4. or a rigger brush if you feel comfortable using those. I'm not a huge fan of them, but that's just me. Now I'm going to bring back in a little bit of detail into the trunk because it looks a little flat. So I'm using a tiny little chisel brush, a really cheap one, and I'm adding some water to some of these areas, and then I'm dabbing it out with a shop towel, and that will add some lighter areas and give some definition to the trunk. Now for our next texture technique, and this one is splattering, and that is one of Paul Clark's favorite things to do. But anyways, I'm going to cover over my sky with some shop towels here so that I don't mess up my nice water in my sky. And then I'm going to take a nice wet mixture on my brush, and I'm going to use my finger as a stop. I'm going to slam my brush into my finger, and I'm going to splatter some nice like dots of paint all over, and that's going to add a little bit more texture into all of this rock area here. It's a very, very useful technique for rock, for water, for sea spray, for stars, all kinds of things. I do have another video that goes over all of these texture techniques a little more slowly. If you'd like to watch that, the link is above. I'm noticing that it's a little bit too light underneath this tree. There should be a whole lot of kind of, not deep shadow, but some nice, good, healthy shadow. So I'm adding in a nice watery mixture of Payne's gray here around the base of the tree and making sure that all of that foliage is casting a nice shadow on this area. Now that all of this foliage is dry, I'm actually coming back in with a much darker mix of my darkest green, and I'm adding in a few dotty, like leafy type texture areas here, just to add a little bit more definition in the shadow area. And I've added some more cadmium yellow to my yellowest of the green mixes, and I'm adding that in the highlight areas. That is where the sun is showing through the leaves here. I've added even more Payne's gray to my brown mix, and I'm coming back in and adding in the darkest shadows in all of the areas. In the grass, on the rocks, all of that. So where I'm adding it in the rocks, I'm making sure to soften that with some nice clean water once I get this whole area done, so that it's not quite just, you know, black lines on the edges of things. Here in Oklahoma, it's very well known that Will Rogers, who was a radio personality, he was well known in Hollywood, he wrote newspaper articles, all back in the 1930s, is from Oklahoma. And it's commonly believed that he's from Claremore, but he is actually born on land that is now encompassed by Oologah Lake. And they actually moved the house that he was born in to a hill overlooking Oologah Lake. And then I've added in some very light and very subtle cerulean blue ripples to this area right here. You can see it in the photo, so I thought I'd add it in. Now I'm going to use some soft pastels to add in some finishing details, and this is just adding in some texture on the trunk, some texture on the rocks, add in some highlights to the grass, and then highlights into the leaves in a minute. And then I'm also going to use a couple of pastel pencils to add in some, you know, some of the grass blades here. And then finally, I'm using a medium gray soft pastel to add in a few more highlights in the shadow areas of the rocks. And here's the finished product, all dry and with the tape removed and signed and stuff like that. And I really hope that all of these texture techniques become a useful part of your arsenal as a watercolorist. Arsenal, that makes it sound a little bit dangerous, but hey, I mean, you know, who says a watercolorist isn't dangerous? And there you have it, a lovely little lake scene nestled in the heart of Oklahoma. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share, all of that stuff because it really does help y'all. I will see you again in 2 weeks.